I'm Emma Turner.
And I'm Tom Sherrington. Welcome to our very first episode of Mind the Gap, Making Education Work Across the Globe. We're delighted to have you join us. Emma, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself?
Oh, well, I've had 22 years in the primary sector. I've been a school leader, a national strategy consultant, a co-head teacher, but I'm currently working for a MAT as a research and CPD lead, but some people may know me as the founder of New Ed because I'm very involved in effective early career development. And I really want to prioritise primary and the early years perspective during our show. And you also might know me from looking at things like flexible working, flipping the leadership narrative, and you can find me in the TES or the GEC as well. So that's kind of my career in a nutshell. Tom, we've only got 30 seconds and I know your career is immense. Can you give us a little bit of a précis?
Okay, well, yeah, it's been a roller coaster. I started 30 odd years ago. I started teaching physics in the late 80s. I think of myself as really a physics teacher. And then I got the bug for school life and wanted to be a school leader, and I did that in a couple of places. And after a few ups and downs, I found myself becoming a writer. I started writing a blog, teacherhead.com, and communicating with the Twitter world and various things like ResearchEd about evidence-informed practice, which is one of my favourite kind of things to think about alongside curriculum. So I'm really excited to have this platform that we've got together to share ideas, get people in, debate things, pull things around a bit, and really focus on this whole issue of minding the gap, which is all about educational disadvantage and getting kids to learn and be excited about their education, and teachers excited. So it's really exciting and brilliant to be having so many people joining us. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what's going to happen in this show?
Well, today, Tom, what you're going to talk about is your Learning Rainforest model, which loads of people will be really intrigued about and may have read about in your book. And then I'm going to talk about developing professional and intellectual curiosity. And then later on in the show, we've got a fantastic guest, Mr. Richard Gerver, who is an amazing educator and international keynote speaker. So I'm really looking forward to talking to him.
Welcome back, everyone. Something that's on my mind is the question I'm often asked about what Learning Rainforest means. It's the title of a book I wrote. And the rainforest, it was part of a metaphor that I developed when I was the head of a grammar school, where when I first arrived there, I think in my head, I'd been a kind of school leader who was probably quite inclined to say, look, if it's a good idea, we should all do it, because that's kind of makes sense. I've got a good idea, I've got evidence for it, and I believe in it. So I'd be one of those people that would elevate that to be kind of a universal, we all must do this. And when I got to this school, which is called KEGS, that was its acronym, I came across teachers there who were exceptional. Like you wouldn't find a better chemistry teacher or a better English teacher. And yet they were quite different, eccentric even, maverick. And I was faced with this challenge of, well, how do I manage this team of exceptional teachers when they're all so different? Who am I to say how to teach chemistry better than he does or she does? And there are lots of other things to do with, computer systems, or whether everybody needs to choose the same poems. And I realized that the sort of what I've been doing was being guilty of what I call plantation thinking. So everyone must do the same. And it's sort of well intentioned. It means, you want things to grow, to flourish. So you provide sort of standard conditions, and you're kind of dealing with the bottom line and making sure everything's at least above a standard. But what that does is it cuts off the sense of organic flourishing and things taking excellence in their own form. And I started thinking what I need to do is reframe that. And actually, when I started my blog, teacherhead.com, which has led to me writing books and so on, you had to sort of type in a little byline. And I thought, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the rainforest of teaching and leadership, because that's kind of how this school was inspiring me to think, which means the rainforest is about excellence taking many forms, diversity of approach, but everything being excellent. It's not there's sort of duds and things which are good and bad. It's about different approaches to solutions. And I found that being very helpful to me over the years since then is to think, okay, we need to excel, but let's not confine that to a certain narrow range. So it takes form in terms of teaching teams. We have to agree certain things that we agree on, because it's kind of sensible from a workload perspective to have agreed approaches and to share resources and that sort of thing. But teachers thrive on autonomy. You like to feel like your own person, like your classroom is your place where you can be yourself and express yourself. And so I think the rainforest thinking comes in there. And as a school leader, I found it really helpful to say things like, rather than starting with, here is the school's mandated marking policy everyone must follow, I'd be saying, guys, what would be your ideal marking policy, say in maths or in science or languages? Tell me what you think that might look like for you. And then we'll look at it. And then what we find is a range of approaches, each of which is excellent. And there's no need to standardize. So that's where the rainforest thinking comes in. What do I think about it now? I think a blended approach sometimes be useful. If you go too far to the rainforest, you can have, some people don't flourish in that environment. They do need more structure. And sometimes it's just pragmatic and sensible to say, look, let's all have some common approaches so that we get things going. And I do think it's not about one or the other, more about, when is the right approach to take. But if you never allow the rainforest thinking to come into you, if you're really a super controller, you are already cutting off a lot of potential, I think. So it's about finding the right balance. There's a danger that rainforest thinking sounds all very, idealistic and woolly. I don't think it is. I think it's more naturally how schools operate anyway. But it's always that focusing on the excellence. It's multiple ways to excellence. Anyway, so I hope that's been a useful response to that question I'm always asked, and maybe give you something to think about in your context.
Hi, welcome back, Emma again. I wanted to talk a little bit about the chapter in the book about 101 Gruffalos and why I called it that. It was basically because I wanted to point out how our attitudes towards learning seem to change. Toddlers absolutely delight in learning, delight in reading, delight in finding things out, and they really do prioritize learning over everything else. They're learning machines. But too often as adults, what we do is we neglect that kind of joy and escapism of learning and being really fully lost in something which kind of fires our intellectual curiosity, captures our imagination. And what we do is we neglect the opportunity for personal development, intellectual growth, and adding to kind of the professional knowledge and skills canon that we have in teaching. And we relegate it. We relegate it to the one day, the holidays, or even worse, the kind of someday, maybe never, really. But if we're going to be leaders of learning in a classroom, or if you're in a leadership post or position, what we really need to do is, like toddlers, be absolutely voracious in our appetites for learning and development. And we need to find that learning which really kind of fires our intellectual curiosity, keeps us thinking. We need to seek opposing or challenging viewpoints to galvanize where we stand on something, or to kind of to challenge and change our thinking. We basically need to prioritize the adventure of learning and prioritize that over the mundane and over the procedural, a bit like kind of peppering your learning or peppering your diet with something that's really interesting, and kind of savor that in your work. And obviously it's part of our professional responsibilities. It's in the teacher standards, it's in the core content framework, it's in the early career development stuff. It's everywhere. We have to do it as a profession, but really, is it enacted and is it embedded, or is it like a series of hoops through which we're just having to jump because we have to do professional learning? So what's really important is like the toddlers, is to find something to be up to. Now, my favourite ever book written by an educationalist is The Magic Weaving Business by Sir John Jones, and he talks about in there that the best people, not just in teaching but everywhere, are always up to something. They're always, they've got a project or something or a new way of looking at something, and they're always up to it. Now, at the moment, with kind of lockdown, there are loads of opportunities for us to sort of be up to something. Now, it might be reflecting on our own practice. It might be immersing ourselves in children's literature or in the subject knowledge associated with the subjects that we teach, or really delving deep into some aspects of our practice. But what we need to be mindful of is there's a wealth of information out there. So we kind of need to approach it with a bit of a critical eye, a bit of a more discerning way of looking at it. And one way that really helps me to decide what I'm going to learn is the model that the Teacher Development Trust over here have, which is the organisational edge. And David Weston from the Teacher Development Trust, in his book, Unleashing Great Teaching, talks about the organisational edge, about how what you learn, unless it's enacted at the kind of outer edge between the school, its staff, its leaders, its policies, its procedures, unless that has an impact on the schools and the staff, and the schools and the communities and the families that we serve, then it's not really going to change anything. So one way of thinking about what you really want to get involved in is what kind of impact is it going to have on that organisational edge. The other thing to be mindful of at the moment is that we can only kind of amass what we call propositional knowledge, which is facts and theory. Now, that's not a bad thing. Teacher subject knowledge and knowledge of your subject is absolutely critical, but we can't enact it in the way that we normally would at the moment. We can't amass that kind of case and strategic knowledge. So we need to be mindful of what we're actually going to read and to delve into, because otherwise there's so much out there. We could be a little bit like an unsupervised toddler at a buffet and just having a little bit of everything. So having that really clear focus on what's going to change on the organisational edge as a result of me doing this learning, am I interested in? Is it something I want to be up to? Is really, really important. So I guess what I'm really saying is find something that, just like a kid, makes you want to read long into the night with a torch. Kind of, you just can't put it down because you're really fired up about it. And if you can marry that with impact on the organisational edge, then we're on to a winner. So my kind of question that I've been mulling over, I know what I'm up to. I know what I'm kind of doing, what I'm kind of up to. But it's actually taking the time to think about what really fires your intellectual curiosity. And as Sir John Jones would ask you, what are you up to at the moment? Welcome back, everybody, and a big warm welcome to our guest today, Mr. Richard Gerver, international, I was going to say man of mystery then, international educator, writer, author, who is going to kick us off by settling a bet between me and Tom about exactly how many books you've written and in what order. I've got a £5 wager on this.
Oh boy, no pressure then for either of you. So 4 books. The first one was Creating Tomorrow's Schools Today. The second one was Change, Learn to Love It, Learn to Lead It. The third one was Simple Thinking. And the most recent one, which was summer 2019, was Education, a Manifesto for Change. So who won the £5?
Me.
Let's just say Tom's £5, Rich. Only because I saw your tweet where you tweeted those beautifully spined, simple thinking books, and I was like, oh my goodness, he's got another one. Hadn't quite twigged that it was in.
Yeah, listen, lesson number 1 for this conversation: never believe what you see on social media. That's all I'm saying.
Excited, though. So excited, because your other Manifesto for Change, I'm not kidding you, I've almost run out of highlighter because I'm one of those awful people that highlight inside the book. I've highlighted it a bit, so while I sulk about losing a £5, Tom, the first question.
I think it's really, for people listening and watching and not knowing, what you're all about. I think it's a really good, broad thing. Is what is the main thing that you want to get across? In Manifesto for Change, you talk about creating tomorrow's schools, and there's definitely a kind of theme. What is the thing that kind of is sort of driving you? What are you trying to get across to people?
Well, I think, Tom, when it started out on this, the whole thing's been accidental, as I'm sure you and Emma will both appreciate, in terms of the way our careers all followed this kind of weird path. When I first left my headship and wrote Creating Tomorrow's Schools Today, really for me, it was a way of just explaining and capturing everything I believed in education in that moment, and why we'd done what we'd done in the school that I was fortunate enough to be a leader of. But what I think's happened that's really interesting since that period is that as I've been exposed to more and more and more things, both not just within education and education in a kind of global sense, but other industries, other areas of life, 2 things have really struck me. One is how we all think our problems are unique, and actually so much around issues to do with leadership, education, human development, All of those things are generic across a whole range of sectors. And the second is, to an extent, just how disconnected we all are. And so I think through the series of the 4 books really chart, I think, 4 chapters of my life: my career in education, my career post-education, and then the one Emma held up, which is my most recent book, really was my way of trying to pin it all together and say, look, here's what I think I've learned from that journey in terms of what that means back into education, trying to create that link and bridge so that we have a more collaborative and connected narrative about what we should be doing big picture around not just the future of education, but preparing our children for the complexities of what they're going to be dealing with later on in life.
So I'm really interested, because my big thing is what that means in practice. I mean, this is kind of, I guess my perspective on this is I totally agree with what you're saying there, but then I want to know the so what. So if I'm running a school, or I'm a teacher of maths for year 8 or something, what does that mean? What kind of things are you saying which are we ought to be doing that we're not doing?
Oh God, that's a really good, challenging question. I mean, look, I want to start off by saying, because one of the things I'm very uneasy about, and have been over the last few years, is anybody that has been inside the system, comes out of the system, and then claims to explain what the system should be, can be accused of being overly critical of the system. And I want to start by prefacing that I really am not. I am always and will always be a teacher at heart. And I am very proud of the fact that I'm just an educator on a big adventure. What I would say, however, is that we have to understand that the challenges of the future do not just rely on making sure our kids gain qualifications and get through exams. And so one of the things for me is, as an entire school, whether it's at secondary level, primary level, elementary, high school, middle school, what we have to do is make sure that we have a connected vision for what we're trying to offer on top of subject knowledge. So if I was a maths teacher, of course it's important both to share my passion, transmit my knowledge to my students, to get them through all the hurdles they have to get through. But it's also saying, but I have to have a commitment to helping to develop this person as a rounded individual. Because one of the things that's really, really clear and it's extraordinary, I think, that we're recording this during the time of coronavirus and COVID and everything that's going on around that. Because really what that's done is just amplify the challenges that the future holds for our kids anyway. And that means, and I know it's a hackneyed path, but we have to make sure that our students are developing all of those soft skills. And I know those soft skills that our kids are going to need in order to frame their future. Because one of the things you keep hearing from employers and that next stage of our young people's development is, I'm getting some technically smart kids, but when I ask them to self-manage, lead, innovate, work in teams, collaborate, solve problems across a whole range of interconnected programs, they struggle to do that. So for me, it's about how do we ensure, if I'm an individual teacher, as well as delivering what I need to deliver, what am I doing to also help shape and mold those young people to prepare them for that future? And that can't rely, sorry, Emma, we can't rely on each other to do it. So we can't just say, oh, that's humanities responsibility, or that's science responsibility, or languages. Sorry, Emma.
No, I was just going to think, because while my kids have been off school, and obviously I've been trying to homeschool them and work and live and hide in the office when I can, I was thinking about when they go back to school, what will they actually learn? Because what they can learn at home remotely isn't necessarily what I want to send them to school for. Because at the moment, the teaching that teachers are doing to the best of their ability via whatever medium we're using at the moment is just the knowledge bit. Because we can't do the interconnectedness part because we're not in that school environment, and they can't be part of a team or sit in an assembly or feel the exhilaration of like performing to a class or anything. There's none of that at the moment. So it's really, for me, and listening to you there, it's really kind of shone a light on the fact that actually there's what we want children to learn about at school, but actually what we want them to learn from the school experience about functioning. And I know that in your books you talk a lot about systems and structures changing nothing and people changing things. People do. So I was kind of thinking, so what has education still got to learn about what we want from people?
I think that's a really great question. The truth is, I think that as educators, we all instinctively know, and the reason we came into the job was because we wanted to create rounded, powerful young people who had aspirations and they had knowledge and they had skills to be able to fulfill those aspirations. I think one of the great challenges we face is that in certain climates, we've become so entirely focused on fixed and particular outcomes, the ways we measure education success. And therefore schools and teachers have felt increasingly under pressure to focus on those things. It's very interesting. You go back to the thing about homeschooling as it is currently for most children. And what we're hearing from a lot of people right now is we've got to get kids back in schools to get them into their exam syllabus, to make sure they don't miss too much of it, to get them through that. And actually, what we've got to be doing is saying, hold on a minute, let's just back off. Our kids have had extraordinary experiences over the last few weeks. Good, bad, horrific, all kinds of mixed experiences that are shaping them as individuals. And one thing that you hear children say a lot is, I really miss school. But they don't say, I really miss school because I miss my physics lesson.
Fronted adverbials.
Right?
Well, they would if it was me.
Well, obviously. But what they're saying is, I miss my teacher. I miss the human interaction. I miss my friends. I miss the socializing. I miss the unintended parts of the curriculum. And I think what we have to do is have the confidence as educators to realize just how powerful that offer is actually in our schools and what we give our kids, because sometimes we're so engrossed in doing the deliverable that we forget the value of the other stuff we offer our kids. One
of the things I think is interesting though for me, Richard, is the kind of the kind of deliverability of that. So because what you're saying, it sounds like it's hard to argue, and I totally get that. The spirit of it, that this is why we love teaching, this is why schools are such wonderful community places, that sense of belonging. But you sort of, these things have to take a form, don't they? So, it sounds to me like what you're talking, in my head, I'm thinking what you're talking about is curriculum. You're talking about a broad curriculum, which has lots of knowledge, but also experiences. And it's not just like doing, resilience on a drop-down day in June or something. It's sort of, so I'm really interested in that side of things, where you get sort of down to the tangible. What sort of things do you think schools might do to kind of do the things you're saying? Like you're talking about special gathering
there, Tom, because in terms of primary practice, that's primary practice because it's integrated across the whole day. Because you're the only one person there leading it as the one teacher, you've got that luxury of bringing all that in, the human bit and the maths, then the English. I don't mean topic work, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you've got control over the diet over the whole day, whereas in a secondary model, you've got individual teachers teaching individual subjects, and there's not necessarily that kind of human coherence that one person who's in charge of 30 children for the whole day brings at a primary level, because you get to do that. And I'm not saying that bringing a primary model into secondary is the way forward, but what I'm saying is that what Richard's talking about happens in primary at the minute.
I think it's true, but I think you're right, Emma, but to go back to what you were saying, Tom, I think for me, a lot of this is about clarity of expectation, about a series of vision and values. You were a hugely successful secondary head who would have created a school environment where a lot of this stuff was unspoken. And I think sometimes, going back to what I was saying, I think great teachers at any level, wherever they are in the system, from university, secondary, primary, early years, wherever they are, you know, we all remember our great teachers because they do that 360 thing, right? I mean, how many kids do we talk to and how many people do we know of our own generation that when you say, what did you love at school? They might say maths, they might say English, they might say whatever it is. But then you unpick it and you go, okay, but where did that love come from? And actually most kids go, because I had a certain teacher that just made me catch fire, right? And so sometimes it's about bringing, for me, the implicit into the explicit. So having conversations as a staff for me around things like, okay, so what do we want our students to look like as human beings when they leave us? What kind of people do we want our kids to be? And if we can make those conversations more explicit and we can hold each other to account more for that behavior, we can start to be more collegiate about the way we spread that through the school. But also for leadership, it means then we have a language with which we can hold people to account.
Yeah, so it's. I mean, I think it's interesting. I mean, one of the things that I was going to ask you, which is again getting into the wrestling with the kind of the ideals versus the practicalities. It was on a video. It was on your website, and it's something I think you're talking to some teachers in Spain, and you're talking about. You say something about students should be able to follow their own passions, rather than say the subjects that we choose for them. So again, it's sort of a curriculum thing. And I was really interested in that, sort of to unpick that a bit, sort of, because I've had this tension myself with various debates, you know, where at what point do you give children choices that are kind of good choices, you know, and when can you trust them to make good choices? And I was just really interested in hearing your view of that, because I know that's maybe a bit beyond the COVID response, but in the long term.
Yeah, but I think it's hugely important, Tom, because I think it comes down to this thing, you know, at the heart of so much of our society is the seismic shift we've got to make on a grandiose level is one from a society that's predicated on the assumption of incompetence to a society that's predicated on the assumption of excellence. And at the heart of that really is trust. And it's very interesting because I see these debates all the time at policy level, at various sort of education levels. At what point can we trust kids? At what point can we ensure they make the right decisions? Well, the truth is never. If you look at the most powerful man on earth right now, right, yeah. I would say I wouldn't trust him with anything. And he's a man in his late 70s. And the point is, we never get to a stage where we can be guaranteed that we're going to make the right decisions or even good decisions. I know I make as many lousy decisions now as I do good ones. And in fact, I made some of my best decisions as a kid. And I think, you know, when you look at one of my passions for why we find change so difficult as we get older comes from observing and watching kids in an early years unit, right? Now, when you watch kids in a really well-run early years unit, what you see are kids who are self-managing. They're delegating to one another. They're responding to each other's talents and weaknesses. They're collaborating. They're making good choices. And yes, sometimes they make lousy ones, but boy, they learn fast and they bounce back and they go again. And I think one of the things, going back to this thing about trust, is I think sometimes we don't give our kids enough credit for the human beings they are. And our instinct is to protect them from falling and protect them from making mistakes. And actually, as we all know, that is the most important thing about any form of learning. You know, you learn nothing new by getting something right. You only learn something new from the point of a mistake, the realization you don't know something or you can't do something. So we need to advocate better for young people to be allowed to make their own choices and sometimes make crass errors of judgment and sometimes make really great ones. And, you know, the other thing is that's how I don't know about you, but when I was a kid of 5, I wanted to play for Arsenal Football Club. Don't judge me on that. I wanted to play for Arsenal. And for our American listeners, that's soccer, by the way, the real football. By the time I was 12 or 13, I wanted to be a lawyer because I'd watched a couple of legal dramas on telly and thought that was really sexy and cool. And my mum let me go and spend a couple of, as luck would have it, my parents were getting divorced at the time. So I went and spent a couple of weeks with my mother's divorce lawyer. And what I found was actually that was far too much like hard work and there wasn't enough. The point is, we have dreams, we have aspirations, and the really important thing is to let us play them out. And that's how we evolve best. I worry that I've met too many kids, particularly really smart kids, that have gone through the education system and done everything they've been asked to do, and suddenly get to the age of 24 or 25 and go, what the hell am I doing here? I hate my life. I don't want to be doing this, but I've done it because other people told me it was the right thing to do.
Yes.
What's really interesting as well is that in best practice in early years, you follow the interests of the child. And it's almost like you come out of early years and into a statutory curriculum, and all of a sudden you're now going to do what the curriculum says, rather than all that best practice in early years with toddlers, with nursery, with preschool, of actually follow what the children are interested in and build on that, using your professional knowledge to kind of steer them, but actually build on what they enjoy. Because like you say, you end up at 24 having been told this is what you will learn and this is what you will do and this is where you're going to go because we've decided that this is the best thing for you. But actually, you strip it all back and you think you go back to when you were little, and actually we were asking you what you were interested in. Why do we flip it? And all of a sudden,
I think it's because,
age of 5.
It's because of the knowledge, isn't it? I think the thing is that, you don't know what you don't know. And so, if you're doing a year 4 unit on the Vikings or something, and not many kids are going to know that that's even there. So you need to introduce that. You need to introduce them to great literature, or else they wouldn't go and read it.
Oh, I totally get that.
So I think for me, this sort of territory, and I have the same debates, is within a subject. So if I'm a science teacher, even at Key Stage 2, I need the kids to sort of, know how to build a circuit, but then I can give them an opportunity to kind of experiment with that. So they're making choices about what sorts of things to make, but they're finding things out. But unless I show them what to do first, they just would be
I get that.
Going down a blind valley. So you have to teach them, and I think these things are quite subtle actually, because the idea that you can just sort of discover or find things. If you're taught maths really well, you need to be shown exactly how to do things, and then you can go and investigate. I mean, does that make sense? Because I think early years into, say, year 7 is quite problematic.
No, I do. Go on, Emma. Sorry.
I think it's we trust a preschooler to tell us what they're interested in, and then we know what they've got to learn. But what we do is we watch them and we watch what motivates them and what they're engaged with, and then we tailor our practice to fit getting what we know we need them to know to stick, because they're engaged with it. And then they pass into this massive bottleneck at age, from this wonderful wide world of preschool and early years education, and they get into this narrow bottleneck, and all of a sudden it's like, well, we know best. And yes, we do, and there's a huge kind of knowledge canon that we need to kind of expose them to, and the richness of that. But actually, what we shouldn't do at the same time is say, and you will do it exactly like this. Whereas before preschool, there was kind of that wriggle room for them to help lead us with the learning as well.
I think this is we're hitting at the heart of it, really, Tom. And I think this is, and Emma, I think this is really the nub of the tension. And I think one of the dangers is we slip too easily when we're listening to education debate into black or white. It's either this or it's this. And I think the truth about human development is it isn't neatly linear. You can't just say either or. Either I'm just going to develop skills and attributes and behaviors, or I'm going to teach knowledge, or that knowledge has to come first and then we can get into experimentation. Because if that was the truth, how on earth do kids under 5 learn at the extraordinary rate they do? Because at point zero, ground zero, they know nothing. But we learn more in the first 5 years of our lives than we do in the rest of our lives put together. So it's a delicate balance. There are definitely, one of the things I describe to educators all the time is we have 2 primary functions, I believe. The first is to help our kids dream. And what I mean by that is kids from variant contexts, we need to introduce them to things. We need to introduce them to the world, to the wonders of literature, to the wonders of science, to the wonder of math, to music, to dance. We have to introduce them to the world, because the broader their experiences, the more their aspiration, their dreams develop, right? But then the real art form of teaching is to take those dreams and turn them into aspirations. And for me, aspirations are the tangible bit. That's where the knowledge and the skill really comes in. Because if a kid says, I want to be an astronaut, I'm passionate about this, I've always wanted to be an astronaut, then you go, if that's the case, these are the rungs on the ladder you need to take if you're serious about turning it into something tangible. And so I think that's where, for me, we've got to stop thinking it's about aspirations or dreams and realize that if the real skill comes from developing them both in harness. And if we get that right, kids' aspirations and dreams may change. Mine did. The idea of being a lawyer was knocked out the park for me when I realized how much academic rigor there was in the use of language. And for me, I knew, having experienced it, it wasn't for me. That didn't stop my passion for language and writing and speaking and all the rest of it, but it changed it. But you're right, Tom. I wouldn't have been able to make that judgment if I hadn't have had a wonderful middle-class mother who happened to be going through divorce at the time, which allowed me to be with a lawyer.
One of the debates I have with some people is, for good reason, some people will say disadvantaged kids don't have resources at home, so if we're setting open-ended projects for them to do, we're disadvantaging them. And I sort of sometimes flip that around and say, you're sort of, it sounds to me like you're saying you're too poor to be doing a project, and that sounds patronizing. And so people think, no, I'm being rude to them now. But I think, well, you've got to find form for these things, and so I'm always asking this: where in the curriculum do kids have a choice? Where can they be open-ended? Where can they make a decision without cutting off? That's the thing. That's the problem with choice, isn't it? Without cutting off. So curriculum design is so complex, isn't it? The way you drop subjects, you never do them ever again. I mean, when I was about 14, I wanted to run a nuclear power station. That was my dream. I watched the China Sea about a nuclear sort of disaster, and I just thought, I think Jack Lemmon was in it. I thought he looked cool, so I thought I wanted to be him. But
oh my God. Well, you see, when I went to all my exams and everything at school, and they did the careers advice thing, mine came out with ocean cartographer. I cannot read a map, and I've got a phobia about fish. So the whole system of everything about dreams and aspirations, my career development was going to the sea where you're phobic of fish and read a map and make a map, which you can't do.
I mean, going back to that point, Tom, which I think is a really serious one, which is about children in disadvantaged areas and disadvantaged situations. And, it's a whole different discussion for another day about what impact that COVID and school closure is going to have on them over this period. But in a way, that's why it's so important that we contextualize curriculum for me. Because the danger is, if we're just put under too much pressure to deliver syllabus, our kids feel the reason they're doing it is to prepare to get a qualification, rather than, kids that come from really great environments where they're exposed to a whole range of different life experiences can pin what they're learning in a science lesson or a maths lesson or an English lesson to maybe one of the worldly experiences they're having outside of the school curriculum. And I think one of the great challenges for us, if we're going to close the gap, if we're going to help kids in areas of disadvantage, is to realize we have to give them the context for them to pin that knowledge and that learning on. Otherwise, for me, it just becomes transitory, and it just becomes something you do for a very short-term purpose. Yeah. I don't want kids learning. I'm passionate about acting. I don't want kids learning Shakespeare because it'll help them get a grade at GCSE. I want them learning Shakespeare because of the absolute joy and magic of the language and the emotional response and the history, the historical context. I want it to make their hearts beat faster like it does mine. And in order to do that,
there are people like,
we have to make sure they've got experience.
Definitely, yeah. Christine Council's ideas about the hinterland, I think, are really useful there. Like, she says the core is what you're teaching, but the hinterland that sits around it is as important. Yeah. And that, to me, has been quite a liberating concept for teachers. And in fact, even just the other day, Dylan William, who's associated with a kind of research ed, kind of formative assessment movement, but he was saying he thinks we're teaching too much. The curriculum's too big, and which means that it's difficult to teach it all as well as we could, and then to give space for these other experiences. So it's very interesting. I feel like some of these things, it's a bit like the classic thing of describing the elephant with a blindfold, you know, and we're all talking about the same thing, but the things you emphasize in what you're saying are different to the things I emphasize, and Emma and I don't have different perspectives as well. But I do think this is right, that we are kind of talking about the same ideals. Probably it's just how the language we use comes across.
And I think that is, of everything, you know, going right back to the start as we kind of finish, is Education, a Manifesto for Change for me, when I wrote that book, was a plea for people to collaborate and realize that whatever our perspective within education, you know, rather than giving each other language like a label or a polar position, or believing this person's right or this person's wrong, or we've got to invest our time in bringing this person down or deconstructing their argument. The truth is, every single educator I've met, from whichever part of that sphere they're in, the one thing we share is an absolute passion for our kids. And you're right, however we use that language and explain it, pretty much you strip it back, we believe in the same stuff. And what I love, by the way, about being invited onto this show with you guys, is the conversation we just had. 3 people, 3 different angles and experiences within education. And if we had 5, 6, 7 hours and days and weeks to keep this conversation about, we would find we would move our philosophies into a common practical way of developing the system. And so I guess what I urge people to do is to stop investing energy in trying to explain why I'm right and you're wrong, and spend as much time as they can finding those common kernels, and we'll create a system worthy of our kids.
Well, that sounds good. Emma, what do you think?
Oh, I'm just thinking that the whole lockdown period where we're not in school and we're at home is a perfect opportunity for having those kinds of discussions about when we go back, my colleague Claire said this today, what kind of normal do we want to go back to? And actually thinking about, in this space that we've got, if we're going to go back and create a new normal, which parts of the old normal are worth bringing back and which ones do we actually want to change? So that's what I'm mulling over at the moment.
Yeah, well, I think that's fantastic. Well, I really thank Richard for coming on to the programme and to our show. And, you know, we're talking about minding the gap and trying to find out what closes gaps for kids around the world. And I think you've really helped us there. So, honestly, it's been a real joy. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been an honour. Thank you both.
Wow, what an interview. I could listen to Richard all day. He's got so much to say, so much relevance to all aspects of the sector. I'm definitely going to go away and have a long think about everything he said. What did you reckon, Tom?
Yeah, I thought it was fantastic. To be honest with you, I love talking to people who are just so passionate about what they do and are full of kind of vision and ideas. And I suppose really it made me think he's the sort of person I need to spend more time talking to, because in his kind of way of projecting the ideas, it's all sort of quite big picture, ethos driven. And I'm a bit more inclined to say, well, how does it work? You know, what do we actually do? And I want to kind of nail him down to some more specifics, I guess. And I think he was kind of suggesting that as well. Like at the end, he was saying, you know, but if we sat down for long enough, we'd come up with something which you probably all agreed on and so on. But so that's what's so great about what you're going to be doing. Rich is a perfect example of someone who's going to challenge you and maybe accept a bit of challenge back. But I just love his whole sort of passion and commitment to the whole journey that kids are on. And you just can't, you know, you can't not but love that. It's just brilliant, really. So I really love that. But I still want to tie it down. I still want to talk more about, so what's in the curriculum, you know, what would your lessons look like? And I guess that's just like setting up further conversations down the line.
That's you, me, Mr. G, tea and cake. It's a date.
Yeah, sounds good.
So we hope you enjoyed listening to Tom, to me, to Richard. So please do send in additional questions to our mailbag via the hashtag on Twitter. Please do follow us on social media, and we look forward to seeing you again really soon. So thank you very much. Bye-bye from me.
Thanks. Goodbye, everybody. Cheers.